Daniel had been searching for the perfect home for years. He wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just something quiet, comfortable, and with enough charm to make every morning feel like the start of a holiday. When his real estate agent showed him a property on the edge of a small lakeside neighborhood, it immediately felt different. The drive there was calm, with narrow roads shaded by tall, leafy trees that swayed in the breeze. Birds darted between branches, and the air carried that fresh, clean scent that only comes from being near water. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this drive would soon become his favorite part of the day. When he first stepped into the house, it wasn't the kitchen, the spacious living room, or the sunlit bedrooms that captured his attention. It was the view from the back porch. Beyond the neatly trimmed grass stretched a shimmering lake, its surface glittering like glass under the afternoon sun. Gentle ripples moved across the water, catching light in a way that made the entire scene look like a painting. His agent smiled knowingly. "It's even better in the mornings," she said. "The sunrise comes up right over that far bank." Daniel walked toward the edge of the property, his shoes brushing through the soft grass. As he got closer to the water, the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade. The only thing he could hear was the quiet lapping of the lake against the shore. He noticed a couple of small docks along the opposite side, each one with a boat tied to it. The scene was peaceful, like something from a postcard. When they sat down to go over the paperwork later that afternoon, Daniel skimmed the property description again. It included all the usual details: square footage, year built, recent renovations, but one section made him pause. The legal description clearly showed that the property didn't just stop at the grass line. The lot extended into the water, encompassing a section of the lake itself. He raised an eyebrow. "So, this means I own part of the lake?" The agent leaned forward and lowered her voice, as if she were sharing a secret. "Technically, yes. In fact, according to the plat map, the entire lake is under this parcel number. It's been this way for decades. The previous owner rarely mentioned it, and honestly, most people assume it's a shared space because it's surrounded by houses. But the deed is pretty clear. The lake belongs to whoever owns this property." Daniel felt a mix of surprise and curiosity. Owning a lake wasn't something he'd ever imagined. He wasn't even sure what it would mean in practical terms. All he knew was that it made the property even more unique. Over the next few days, Daniel thought about it often. Every time he visited the house before closing, he found himself drawn to the water. He'd stand on the back porch with a coffee in hand, imagining what it would be like to live here permanently. He pictured early mornings with mist rolling over the surface, afternoons spent reading under the shade of the trees, and evenings watching the sunlight turn the water gold before fading into night. When the sale was finalized, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. He had found more than just a home. He had found a place that felt entirely his own. On moving day, while the movers carried boxes inside, Daniel carried a single folding chair down to the edge of the lake. He set it up on the grass, sat down, and let the world slow to a gentle rhythm. He didn't notice the curious eyes watching from a few houses away. Neighbors had seen plenty of new people come and go over the years, but this one was different. This one had something no one else in the neighborhood could claim: legal ownership of the water they all loved. And while Daniel didn't yet realize it, that quiet piece of information would soon ripple through the area, setting the stage for conversations he never expected to have. For now, though, he simply leaned back, listened to the soft splash of the water, and thought about how lucky he was to have found this little slice of peace. It was a warm afternoon when Daniel first met Cheryl. He had been on his back porch, sipping iced tea and reading, when a gentle knock came at the front door. Setting his glass down, he walked through the house and opened it to find a woman in a crisp blazer, holding a clipboard and wearing a polite smile. "Hello, Daniel," she said warmly, though her tone carried a practiced precision. I'm Cheryl, the association president here. I just wanted to officially welcome you to the neighborhood. Daniel smiled back and invited her in, but she declined with a wave of her hand. Oh, I won't take up much of your time. I just like to meet all the new homeowners in person. They stood by the doorway as she made light conversation, asking about his move, where he'd lived before, and what drew him to the area. Daniel answered politely, though he noticed Cheryl's eyes drifting toward the back of the house, where the porch offered a clear view of the lake. Finally, she tilted her head and said casually, "Beautiful view you've got there. I'm sure you've heard how much everyone here enjoys the lake." Daniel nodded. "It's one of the reasons I fell in love with the place. Peaceful, quiet, feels like it's mine." Her smile flickered, almost imperceptibly, before returning to its original brightness. "Yes, it's certainly lovely. Of course, the lake has always been a big part of our neighborhood's charm. Most of the homes here use it for fishing, kayaking, and little weekend get-togethers. We've been managing its upkeep for years to make sure it stays nice for everyone." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. "Managing it? I thought the lake was private property. Part of my deed." Cheryl gave a small, practiced laugh, the kind that wasn't entirely about humor. "Oh, I'm sure there's some legal wording like that, but practically speaking, it's always been seen as a shared space. It's just easier for the association to oversee it. That way, it doesn't fall on one person's shoulders." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, considering her words. He didn't mind people enjoying the lakes. In fact, he liked the idea of it being a positive part of the neighborhood. But there was something in her tone that hinted at more than just friendly small talk. She continued, "I actually brought some paperwork for you to look over. It's nothing urgent, just a formality. If you could sign here, we can make sure the lake is included in our community amenities officially. That way, everything runs smoothly and you don't have to worry about maintenance costs or permits." Daniel took the papers and glanced at them. They weren't just about amenities. The form clearly stated a transfer of certain rights, including management and usage decisions, from him to the association. Looking up, he smiled politely. "I appreciate you stopping by, but I'll need some time to read through this before I sign anything." Cheryl's expression softened, though Daniel noticed her smile tighten just a little. "Of course, take your time. I just wanted to get..." The process started sooner rather than later. Once it's official, everyone will be on the same page. She left shortly after, walking back down the pathway toward the street. Daniel watched her go, the papers still in his hand. He didn't feel alarmed exactly, but he did feel the first spark of curiosity, maybe even caution. He wondered how many people in the neighborhood believed the lake was theirs to use freely, and how that belief might change if they knew the truth. That evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of him. The language was clear. Signing them would mean handing over authority for the lake. He thought back to the moment he'd first seen the water from his porch. That calm, golden view wasn't just scenery. It was part of his home. Part of what made this place special. He set the papers aside and made a quiet decision. Whatever conversations were coming, he would go into them informed, and on his own terms. Over the next week, Daniel began noticing small changes in his daily routine. They weren't drastic, just subtle signs that something was shifting around him. It started with a letter tucked neatly into his mailbox. The envelope carried the association's logo, and the message inside was written in polite, welcoming language. It spoke about the importance of keeping the lake in good condition, how it had long been a place for local gatherings, and how having the association manage it was the simplest and most beneficial arrangement for everyone. The next day, another letter arrived. This one was a bit more specific, mentioning that coordinated maintenance could help preserve the lake for all residents to enjoy, and that consistent oversight would ensure fair use. Daniel read both letters carefully. They didn't make any demands, but he could feel a gentle push behind the words, an encouragement to go along with a plan he hadn't agreed to. A few days later, while Daniel was on the back porch drinking coffee, he noticed a couple of neighbors strolling by. They waved, then stopped for a chat. After a few minutes of small talk, one of them said with a smile, "You must be loving the lake. You're probably getting used to all the fishing boats going by, right?" Daniel smiled politely. "I don't mind. I like seeing people enjoy it." The neighbor nodded, then added, "Well, it's always been a neighborhood spot, I'm sure. The association will keep it that way now that you're here. They'll probably handle everything like they always have." It was friendly conversation, but it confirmed what Daniel suspected. The idea that the lake belonged to everyone was deeply ingrained. That afternoon, Daniel decided to spend a little time doing some research. He sat down at his desk with a laptop and pulled up the property records. It didn't take long to confirm what he already knew. The lake was fully contained within his property lines on the official plat map. But then he noticed something else, something that made him lean in closer. Each dock along the shore, including those behind other homes, was listed under a permit system, and every single one of those permits was tied to the property owner of the lake, meaning him. He clicked through the records. Some permits had been renewed regularly. Others, however, had expired years ago. In legal terms, those expired permits meant the docks were no longer authorized to remain in the water. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a slow realization settling in. Not only was the lake his property, but the ability to keep a dock on it depended entirely on his approval. The association had been speaking as though they held authority over the lake, but in reality, every structure along its edge fell under his jurisdiction. It was a detail no one had mentioned. And while Daniel wasn't looking for conflict, he understood the importance of knowing where he stood before making any decisions. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, Daniel walked down to the water's edge. The lake was calm, reflecting the fading orange and pink hues of the sky. Across the water, he could see the silhouettes of small docks jutting out like quiet markers of history. He thought about the people who used them, fishing with their kids, tying up kayaks, enjoying the same peaceful mornings he cherished. He had no intention of taking that away. But he also knew that control over those docks gave him a say in how the lake was treated, and that was something worth holding on to. In the quiet of the evening, with the water gently touching the shore, Daniel made a simple promise to himself. He would not hand over the lake without understanding every detail and protecting the value it brought to his home. A week later, Daniel received an email from Cheryl. It was polite, brief, and to the point. She invited him to attend a special discussion at the association's monthly meeting, noting that it would be a good opportunity to align expectations regarding the lake. Daniel read the message twice. It didn't say anything alarming, but the choice of words, "align expectations," hinted that a decision might already be in motion. Still, he replied with a short confirmation that he would attend. On the evening of the meeting, Daniel walked to the community hall at the center of the neighborhood. The small building was warm and welcoming, its walls lined with photographs of past events, summer barbecues, holiday gatherings, and fishing tournaments on the lake. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, with a long table at the front, where the association board sat. Cheryl greeted him with her usual polished smile. "Daniel, glad you could make it. Please, have a seat." As the meeting began, most of the agenda items were routine. Landscaping updates, maintenance schedules, and plans for the next neighborhood picnic. Daniel sat quietly, listening. But then Cheryl glanced down at her notes and said, "Next, I'd like to talk about the lake." The room grew a little more attentive. A few people turned their heads toward Daniel, some smiling, others simply curious. Cheryl continued, As many of you know, the lake has always been a central feature of our neighborhood. It's been enjoyed by families for decades, and the association has worked to keep it safe and well-maintained for everyone. With Daniel now owning the property connected to the lake, it's important to formalize our arrangement so we can continue caring for it as we always have. She then slid a stack of papers across the table toward him. This is a simple agreement. It allows the association to manage the lake officially. That way, there's no confusion about its use or upkeep. Daniel glanced at the documents. The wording was similar to what she had shown him on her first visit, but this version was more detailed. It mentioned scheduling, maintenance decisions, and public access for approved neighborhood events. It also outlined that the association would have full administrative authority over the water. He looked up, offering a calm smile. "I appreciate you putting this together, but I'd like to take some time to review it before making a decision." Cheryl nodded, though her expression carried the faintest trace of expectation. "Of course. We just wanted to bring this up sooner rather than later so we can keep things running smoothly." A board member to her left added, "It really is just a formality, Daniel. Nothing will change for you. You'll still have your view and everything. This just helps the community manage things." Daniel nodded politely. "I understand. I'll read through it carefully and get back to you." The conversation moved on, and the meeting wrapped up about 30 minutes later. As people left, a few stopped to greet Daniel, making small talk about fishing and weekend boating plans. Their words were friendly, but Daniel couldn't help feeling that most of them assumed his agreement was only a matter of time. On the walk back home, he thought about the papers in his hand. It wasn't that he wanted to stop people from enjoying the lake. He liked seeing neighbors out on the water. But the idea of giving up his ability to decide how the lake was managed felt too important to rush. That night, Daniel spread the papers out on his dining table and began reading every line. He made small notes in the margins, underlined phrases that caught his attention, and compared them to the property records he'd found earlier. By the time he was done, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever decision he made, it would be made with a full understanding of his rights. And the more he thought about those dock permits, the more he realized they might be the quiet key to how this would all play out. The morning after the meeting, Daniel sat at his desk with a cup of coffee and the lake agreement still sitting in front of him. He turned it over slowly, not because he didn't understand it, but because he was beginning to think beyond what it said on paper. He opened his laptop and logged into the county property portal once again. It was the same system he'd explored before, but this time he went deeper, searching not just for the parcel maps, but for individual dock permits, zoning classifications, and renewal histories. Within minutes, a familiar pattern emerged. The entire shoreline of the lake fell under his single parcel number. That meant any permanent structure built along it, including the docks, legally required his consent through a permit. Daniel scrolled through each file one by one. Some homeowners had renewed their permits on time each year, but many had not. Several had lapsed more than 5 years ago, and in a few cases the original permits were so old that they predated the current zoning rules. He leaned back in his chair, letting that information sink in. The association had been speaking about the lake as if they were the natural stewards of it, but on paper, the reality was very different. If he chose to, he could require each dock to be brought into compliance, and without his approval, they couldn't legally remain in the water. That evening, Daniel took a slow walk along the path that circled part of the lake. The air was cool, the late afternoon light painting the surface of the water with streaks of gold. He passed by several docks, some freshly maintained, others showing signs of age. A few had fishing gear piled neatly in the corners, and one had a small kayak tied to it. Neighbors waved as he walked by, their greetings warm and casual. He returned each one with a smile, but inside his mind was turning. These docks weren't just part of the scenery. They represented a quiet but undeniable influence over how the lake was used. Over the next few days, Daniel called the local zoning office, not to file any complaints, but simply to confirm what he already believed. The clerk on the other end of the line was cheerful and helpful, confirming that dock permits for his lake could only be issued or renewed with the property owner's approval. When Daniel asked what happened if permits weren't renewed, the answer was clear. The docks would have to be removed or brought into compliance immediately. It wasn't that Daniel wanted to make anyone take down their dock. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had a responsibility, and in his view a right, to ensure the lake was cared for properly. The idea of simply signing over management without knowing exactly how it would be handled didn't sit well with him. Later that week, Daniel began drafting a short, calm letter. It wasn't confrontational or demanding. Instead, it simply explained that as the lake's owner, he would be reviewing all dock permits to ensure they were current. Any expired permits could be renewed directly through him or the proper local office. He printed several copies and tucked them into envelopes, ready to deliver to each homeowner with a dock. As he sealed the last envelope, he felt a quiet sense of readiness. He wasn't looking for a disagreement. He was setting the stage for clarity. That night, sitting on his back porch, Daniel watched the moonlight shimmer across the water. The lake was still and beautiful, the kind of scene that made him remember why he'd fallen in love with this place in the first place. But now, he knew more than ever that keeping it this way meant being careful with every decision he made. Daniel waited until the weekend before delivering the letters. He knew that on Saturdays, most people were home, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood was relaxed. The sun was out, and the lake shimmered in the mid-morning light as he made his way from house to house, with the envelopes tucked neatly under his arm. He didn't knock on any doors or make a production of it. Instead, he slipped each envelope into a mailbox or tucked it behind a door handle. His note was brief, a single page printed in a clean, readable font. It began with a friendly greeting, thanking the neighbors for welcoming him since his move. Then it explained, in straightforward language, that as the property owner of the lake, he was reviewing all dock permits to ensure they were current. The letter outlined how the process worked, where to renew an expired permit, and that any questions could be directed to him personally. There was no mention of removing docks, no deadlines, no warnings, just information. By the time he returned home, the first ripples of reaction were already beginning. Daniel was on his porch when he saw a neighbor from across the lake reading the letter on their deck. Another, walking along the shoreline path, stopped mid-step to read their copy before glancing up toward his house with a thoughtful expression. Later that afternoon, Daniel's phone rang. It was a man named Robert who lived 2 doors down. "Hey, Daniel," he began in a friendly tone. "I got your note. I didn't even realize my permit had expired. Must have been years ago. I guess I just assumed the association handled that." Daniel explained the process, and Robert seemed genuinely appreciative. "Thanks for letting me know," he said. "I'll get it sorted. Honestly, I'm glad you're checking on this stuff. Makes me feel like the lake's being looked after properly." The next call came from a woman named Linda, whose dock had been in place since the early 90s. She sounded a little more cautious, but was still polite. "So, does this mean the association's not managing the lake anymore?" she asked. Daniel answered carefully. "I'm just making sure everything is in order. The lake has always been part of my property, so I'm handling permits directly with owners now. If your permit's current, there's nothing else you need to do." That evening, as Daniel was grilling dinner on the porch, Cheryl arrived. She was as composed as always, though her smile carried an extra layer of formality. "I see you've been in touch with the neighbors," she said, glancing toward the envelopes on his porch table. "I have," Daniel replied evenly. "I wanted to make sure everyone had the right information about their dock permits. Some haven't been renewed in years." Cheryl nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the lake. I understand you want to keep things organized, but usually the association handles communication like this. It keeps everything consistent. Daniel met her gaze with a calm expression. I think it's best that it comes directly from the owner. That way, there's no confusion about how it works. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but deliberate. Then Cheryl offered a polite nod. Well, as long as everyone knows what they need to do, I suppose that's what matters. After she left, Daniel watched the sun dip lower in the sky, turning the water into a sheet of deep orange and gold. He knew the next association meeting would likely include a discussion about his letters, but he wasn't worried. For the first time since moving in, Daniel felt like he was no longer just the new neighbor with the nice lake view. He was the one setting the terms, quietly and without fuss. The week after Daniel sent his letters, the atmosphere around the lake felt noticeably different. Neighbors who once waved in passing now slowed down to chat. Some came with questions about the renewal process, while others simply wanted to confirm that their permits were still valid. One afternoon, as Daniel was trimming a small hedge near the porch, he saw Cheryl walking up the path. She was accompanied by 2 other board members, Robert, whom Daniel had already spoken with on the phone, and a man named Greg, who handled the association's maintenance schedules. "Good morning, Daniel," Cheryl said, her voice pleasant, but purposeful. "We thought it might be a good idea to sit down and talk about the lake." Daniel set aside his clippers and gestured toward the porch. "Of course. Have a seat." The 3 of them settled in, and Cheryl wasted no time getting to the point. "The letters you sent got a lot of people talking. It's clear that the permits are tied directly to you, and we respect that. But we'd like to explore a formal arrangement where the association can still coordinate lake use, events, maintenance, scheduling, while you retain ownership." Daniel listened without interrupting. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a draft agreement, neatly typed and divided into sections. The proposal was different from the earlier versions he'd seen. There was no transfer of ownership or full authority. Instead, it outlined a lease-style arrangement for dock access, with the association acting as an intermediary to handle scheduling and basic upkeep costs. Greg spoke up. "The way we see it, this gives you full control while keeping the lake accessible to everyone. We'd also make sure a portion of the lease fee covers maintenance, so you're not paying out of pocket for things like shoreline cleanup." Daniel flipped through the pages, scanning the details. It was more balanced than before, but he took his time. "I'm not opposed to neighbors using the lake," he said, finally looking up. "But I want to make sure there's clarity. Every dock needs a current permit. Any events on the lake should be approved in advance, and the lease fees should fully cover maintenance and permit processing." Cheryl nodded, making a quick note. "That's reasonable. We can adjust the numbers to reflect that." The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and by the end, they had the outline of a workable plan. The association would lease dock access from Daniel on behalf of homeowners who wanted it. Daniel would maintain oversight of all permits and could approve or deny requests based on compliance. In return, the lease fees would cover his expenses and provide a fair return for the lake's use. As they stood to leave, Robert smiled. "You? No, I think this might actually be better than what we had before. At least now there's no confusion." After they left, Daniel remained on the porch for a few minutes, listening to the quiet sounds of the lake. It felt different now, not in how it looked or sounded, but in how he saw it. This wasn't just a scenic view anymore. It was a part of his home that he had taken the time to understand, protect, and manage. Over the next few days, word spread quickly about the new arrangement. Neighbors who had been unsure at first now seemed relieved. They liked knowing there was a clear system in place, and several even stopped by to thank Daniel for handling things directly. For Daniel, it wasn't about control for control's sake. It was about ensuring that the lake remained a place of beauty and enjoyment, without letting important decisions slip into uncertainty. And as the final lease terms took shape, he knew that the last piece of the puzzle would be making it official at the next association meeting. The next association meeting was held on a cool, clear evening. Daniel arrived a few minutes early, carrying a slim folder with the finalized lease agreement inside. The small community hall was softly lit, and the windows reflected the golden glow of the sunset over the lake. Neighbors trickled in, greeting one another with easy smiles. Daniel noticed that the mood felt lighter than it had in weeks. There was still curiosity about how things would turn out, but the tension that had been quietly building seemed to have eased. When the meeting began, Cheryl worked through the usual: agenda items, landscaping updates, the upcoming summer picnic, and a brief mention of the new walking trail proposal. Then she cleared her throat and turned her attention to the subject everyone had been waiting for. "Our final item tonight," she said, "is the agreement regarding lake use." She gestured toward Daniel. "Since the lake is private property, belonging to Daniel, and since dock permits are tied directly to his ownership, we've worked together to create an arrangement that benefits everyone." Daniel stood, opened his folder, and read from the first page in a calm, even tone. "The agreement confirms that the lake remains private property, under my ownership. The association will lease dock access on behalf of homeowners who choose to participate, and the lease fee will cover maintenance, shoreline care, and permit renewals. All events on the lake will be approved in advance, and all docks must have current permits." He closed the folder and looked up. "This ensures clarity for everyone and keeps the lake in good condition for years to come." There was a short pause before the first hand went up. It belonged to Robert, who had been part of the earlier discussions. "I just want to say this is fair. It keeps things straightforward, and it makes sure no one is left wondering how the lake's being taken care of." Several heads nodded in agreement. A few questions followed, mostly about fees and the renewal process, but there were no objections. The vote to approve the arrangement passed easily with unanimous support. After the meeting, as people gathered their things, a few neighbors approached Daniel directly. Some thanked him for making the process clear. Others admitted they had never realized how the lake was actually owned. One woman smiled and said, "You've done more for the lake in a few weeks than anyone's done in years." Walking home. That night, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. He had entered the situation cautiously, unsure of what to expect, but had managed to find a solution that worked for everyone. He hadn't needed to argue or push. Instead, he had taken the time to understand the details, speak directly, and keep the conversation respectful. Over the following months, life by the lake settled into a pleasant rhythm. The new permit system kept everything organized, and the lease arrangement ensured that maintenance was handled without fuss. Neighbors enjoyed their docks. Summer evenings were filled with the sound of laughter over the water, and the lake remained as peaceful as ever. Daniel kept his mornings just as he'd imagined them on the day he moved in, sitting on his back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the far bank. The water caught the light in a way that made it look alive, shifting from soft silver to warm gold as the day began. Every now and then, he'd think back to the first conversation, with Cheryl at his doorstep, the papers she'd offered, and the subtle assumption that the lake's future had already been decided. Now, looking out at the calm expanse of water, Daniel knew the decision had been his all along. And in the quiet lapping of the waves against the shore, there was a sense of balance. The kind that comes when a place is not just beautiful, but also understood, respected, and cared for by the one who calls it home.